Some of my favourite movies are romance films because I adore love. I think it's one of the most beautiful and complex emotions and subjects there are. But that's the distinction between romance and love. A million movies nail romance. A new rom-com drops every other month that perfectly captures the divine energy of romance. But not that many movies perfectly capture love. Because though it's a generally positive feeling, it is a pathway to heartbreak and many complications you couldn't foresee. It nurtures and nests inside every single person in an individual way, and even within that one person it can manifest in a million different ways depending on the connection they have to the person, animal or thing. The love you have for your mother is not the same love you have for your sibling or partner or child or cat or your favourite mug, but it's all love nonetheless. And Past Lives, I think, handles the complications of love better than almost any film that's been released in the past few years. I saw a review on Paste Magazine's website with the title, "The brilliantly bittersweet Past Lives is impossibly romantic." And I couldn't disagree more. Because romance is positive. A film being romantic is the film having an optimistic view on love. There's a reason we say we're romanticizing things when we're showing overt adoration towards something that doesn't entirely warrant it. Because romance is about a dream, it's almost fictional. Like, you can be romantic and do romantic gestures, but the state of romance isn't eternal unless it's in art. And that's why films about romance work so well, because the characters in them get to have a happy ever after forever. But life isn't really that way. I think one of the most interesting things that Past Lives does is not so much have the characters figure out what they mean to each other, but giving us the outsider's perspective. Like, the first shot in the film is of Nora, Hae Sung and Arthur all sitting at a bar, and these strangers are trying to figure out what connects them, what their relationship to each other is, and in the end, they don't know. It's perfect setup because it instantly tells the viewer that the characters are not clearly defined. They don't know what they're doing or who they are. They're figuring it out. But it turns out that this shot is from the end of the film, which again then informs the audience that we're going to spend the entire time of this gathering evidence to help figure out this puzzle set out in the beginning. What do they mean to each other, and eventually where do they land? Well, after our in medias res beginning, we cut all the way back to a childhood flashback between two friends in Seoul, Korea, Inyun and Hae Sung. Now, just really quick, I'm not Korean nor do I speak Korean, so I'm going to butcher these names. If someone could help me with the pronunciation, that would be beautiful, but for the duration of this video, I'm going to be getting it wrong. Anyway, Inyun, who would later change her name to Nora, which is a whole thing we'll get to, but she's crying. She starts crying because she came second to Hae Sung in a test at school. Now, that's not really important, but what is important is what Hae Sung tells her, which is that this is a one-off. He tells her he's always come second, which of course in that moment he's talking about coming second to her in school, but I think it's beautiful foreshadowing for how Hae Sung always seemingly comes second in her life. When they want to date, they have to move to Canada and he's left behind. When they reconnect, she cuts contact to get her job and dreams on track. And when they once again reconnect, he's fallen too far behind as Nora by now has a husband she's committed to more. And then we move on, we do some stuff, and before Inyun immigrates to Canada, her mom decides to let her have a date with Hae Sung because she wants her daughter to have some good memories of Korea before leaving to become Nora the Canadian. This day is just very cute, very wholesome, and I think it's a good expression of adolescent love, because it's simple. And then Inyun informs all of her classmates she's leaving, and this causes a bit of a rift between the two betrothed. They take this walk home, and just as their paths are about to disconnect, the imagery is so beautiful. Inyun is about to go up these beautiful coloured steps, ascending to her future in a new place, whereas Hae Sung is destined to go down the grey and straight path right in front of him. Because this film is not only about Nora and her complications between unpacking her love for two different men, but it's also about these two men, especially Hae Sung, whose story is honestly heartbreaking, and if this film were from his perspective, it wouldn't be the bittersweet tale that it is. It would just be bitter. But fast forward 12 years and the two old friends reconnect, and first of all, I just want to say using Skype in 2023 is kind of outrageous. I was hearing the notification and call sounds of Skype and it took me all the way back to like 10 years ago when I was using it to video call girls and stuff when I was at school, so that was a bit crazy. But among these calls, in one of them, I couldn't help but notice on Nora's left, she had a few books. Among these books are Macbeth, a play by William Shakespeare, and The Price, a play by Arthur Miller. The others are a bit harder to make out, but I think these two are very interesting pieces to put here. For a start, Macbeth is not a story about love. As in typical Shakespeare fashion, there are threads about love, but it is ultimately a play about political power struggles. You would actually think that Romeo and Juliet would be a more fitting play, or whatever, to just have in the scene, since, that tackles the idea of star-crossed lovers, destined people. But that's not to say Macbeth has no commentary on love, because it absolutely does, and what it does say about love maybe makes more sense than Romeo and Juliet as the obvious pick. Lady Macbeth and Macbeth himself start out in this play a very affectionate couple, the idealistic couple. And for them, the equality they appeared to share in terms of views of one another was intensely progressive. Then of course, when Lady Macbeth hears of her partner's destiny, she pushes and pushes him towards it until he owns it, but in this fulfilling of one's destiny, they grow apart and grow ever so bitter. The play in general is a warning of ambition and how it can drive people apart as well as cause your own downfall. Nora is presented as incredibly ambitious, always wanting a different prize, whether it be the Nobel, the Pulitzer, or even a Tony, and in the wake of this ambition, Hae Sung is left behind every time. The wedge between them grows, and though not to the point of being unmoved by even death, but at least to the point of irreparable damage. As for The Price, I think the dissection of this is just a bit simpler. The Price is a story, if you don't know, about the past and two estranged brothers reconnecting. The parallels there are pretty obvious, right? Okay, so I would also like to quickly shout out the Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind connection, because I think this film was very much inspired by that film, in that the themes of letting go of loved ones and reconnecting are very strong and explored in painfully touching ways in both. And this connection is pointed out when Nora recommends the film to Hae Sung and he watches it, which I think is crucial because this shows the downfall in progress they make on their relationship to one another. They go from talking every day on Skype by Nora getting up early to do it, and then Hae Sung watching films Nora recommends, and then Nora starts to slip as she stops getting up early to catch the calls and clearly starts to show a lack of effort and eventually cuts him off again, which is just an unimaginable pain on behalf of Hae Sung. Then we cut to both of them getting on with their lives, finding new partners and just, doing whatever. But then we get another 12-year jump. In this time we get to know Arthur a bit better, who's Nora's husband that she lives with in New York, and it's at this point you realise we're like 50 minutes to an hour in and the film has successfully built two believable romantic relationships that you're actually invested in. Which is so impressive because a lot of films can't even manage to do that with one relationship over the span of the whole film. But among this juggling, we finally get to the most pivotal moment of the film, where Hae Sung has finally come to New York to meet Nora. I forgot to mention earlier, but I think one of the great minor things this film does is that Hae Sung still calls Nora Nae Young, which she says even her mother doesn't do anymore. It's this idea of him still being in love with who she was before, the person he knew, not necessarily the person she is. He constantly comments on her being the same as she's ever been, but regardless of what he thinks, she's a different person with ever-changing goals that he can't keep up with. Anyway, Nora meets up with Hae Sung and there's a few things to note here. First of all, before he goes on the trip, his friends have this joke because it's supposed to be severe storms the entire time he's there. And that's definitely true for when he arrives, but when he comes to actually meet Nora, it's completely sunny skies. They're also completely surrounded by couples as they talk, but the one thing I noticed which I think is most interesting is that when we parallel this to the last time these two were having a good semi-romantic time, they were playing near these concrete statues which were of two people facing towards each other. But during this meetup they find themselves in front of this concrete statue which features two people facing away from each other. which could be pure coincidence, but I'm electing to believe it was a conscious decision and is symbolizing how these characters are no longer seeing eye to eye on things, they're no longer looking towards each other. This brings Nora back home to her husband, where they have a conversation about Hae Sung. First off, it starts off as her just kind of rambling about Hae Sung, which of course creates a very awkward energy because everything she's seemingly noticing about Hae Sung is something Arthur can never be a part of. Like how she becomes more Korean around him and how traditional he is and just how handsome he is and how Korean he is. Then later, Arthur has this funny revelation where from another's perspective, in the storybook version of this tale, he would be the awful white man keeping apart these destined to be lovers. He then moves on to comment about how Nora sleep talks in Korean and that he feels there's a whole part of her that he can't reach because he's not able to understand her. There's places of her mind he can't visit which can make you feel inadequate as a partner, but even worse, Hae Sung can venture to these places Arthur can't go, which can make a partner feel insecure. But I think the note of her sleep talking in Korean is quite beautiful as a metaphor because Korea and Hae Sung and that life is just a dream for her, it isn't reality. Yes, their story is inherently romantic, but as we've established, this film isn't concerned about being romantic. If it were, she would have left her evil husband to be with Hae Sung and they would have spent the rest of their lives in Seoul, but they don't. Because in real life, the storybook tale is not always better than the boring or conventional story. And that's ultimately what Nora is fighting between. Does she choose the lifelong dream and romantic fantasy, or does she choose her established reality and secure current life? And you know, it's possible to love more than one person romantically at once. Humans aren't exactly wired for monogamy. We do it, it's a social norm, and humans are jealous and envious little freaks. So polyamory rarely ever works, and our emotions are much more complicated than just being able to designate them to one person and one person only. Monogamy is something you work at, something you strive for. It isn't something that comes necessarily easy, especially when entangled with our past lives. And that title doesn't just refer to past lives in terms of our actual past, but also in reference to something that gets brought up a lot, which is Inyun, which basically means a destined connection, something you share with a person you've met over and over again in every life you've lived. Your destinies forever entangled in every universe and every lifetime. The point is to find out what connection that is and what it means in your current life. Because the film is unbiased, it doesn't lean any particular way. The two men are rivals in the sense of Nora can only choose one despite not really presenting that as her predicament, but Hae Sung and Arthur actually get along quite well and they share a kind of Inyun themselves. Which, you know, brings us to the climax of the bar. Having gathered all the evidence, have we put together this puzzle? What are these people to each other? And you know, we still don't know. This scene is so beautiful and awkward. I've never been so endeared and uncomfortable with a situation in a film before. The juggling act that Celine Song pulls off here is incredible, and as Nora is figuring out what Hae Sung means to her right now, Hae Sung realizes his place, which is not with Nora. Maybe it was with Nae Young, but it's not with Nora. He realizes before her that her place is with Arthur, and once again, he comes second. And this brings us to the final moments where he leaves Nora one last time and he asks her what she thinks they'd be in the next life, and her response is, she doesn't know. Because I suppose the truth is, she still doesn't truly know what their place is in this one. He leaves and she cries. She's consoled by Arthur as they return to their home, and it's a movie that never leaves you entirely satisfied because there's no way to. Because if she had left with Hae Sung, we would have felt awful for Arthur. They're all good people, just entangled in a complicated mess of love and shortcomings. Hae Sung is more in tune with who Nora was before. He has access to the part of Nora that Arthur will never understand. But Arthur understands Nora now, and in the most flattering way I can say this, he's the most logical choice. This isn't a fairy tale, it isn't a romance movie. It's a film about love. You know, I've needed some more foreign films this year because compared to last year where there was an abundant amount of great ones, this year doesn't feel as varied. So I'm glad to have gotten something like Past Lives. The only other foreign film I've seen that isn't from the US or the UK is The Dive, which is a pretty good film from Germany. And though the foreign films seem to be less than last year, I'm glad the one we did get was such an interesting and masterful one. There's tons of details I left out and moments and lines I didn't talk about, and that's why I encourage everyone to go and see it. See it twice if you've already seen it, because there is just a million things to unpack. But that's just me. Have you seen Past Lives? If so, let me know what you think about it. Let me know what you think of this video. I read every single comment and reply to as many as possible. And whether it's one about an examination of love and the complications that come with it or not, as always, keep watching movies.